Hi, hello, and welcome back to Event Heroes. My name is Ketan. I'm the VP of Marketing at Zuddl and the host of Event Heroes. For those of you joining us for the first time, Event Heroes is your friendly neighborhood event talk show where we get you the best event folks to come and talk to us about tips and tricks that you can use to improve your event strategy and webinar strategy. You could be doing a user conference, in-person event, hybrid event, virtual, doesn't matter. We've got you covered. And I'm especially excited about our guest today. She has been running events for over 25 years. So she's pretty much seen it all. And I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation. But before we get into that, just a couple of housekeeping rules. You can send in your questions in the Q&A box. We'll take it towards the end just so that it doesn't disrupt the flow of the conversation. And if you need to step away for whatever reason, feel free to do that. We are going to record this session and we'll send you a copy. So don't worry about it. Yeah, with that, I would really love to welcome Sharyn Fitzpatrick to the show.
Good.
Hi, Sharyn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So glad to have you. So Sharyn, for those of us who don't know much about you, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself? What do you do at Sysdig? What does Sysdig do? And we'll take it from there.
So my name is Sharyn Fitzpatrick. I am a certified event technologist. I am passionate about anything virtual, and I've been doing it for a really long time. When there were still dinosaurs out there, I was teaching dinosaurs how to use presentation software and how to be on camera. So I basically am the virtual events and marketing manager for Sysdig. I manage a lot of our virtual presence, help people as far as what they need to do to excel being virtual. And so Sysdig does a lot around cloud security and containers. And we are really about helping people find and how to improve their security and everything else in the cloud. So we are really focused on open source, which is a really important piece. And it's a great company. I love it. I'm proud to be a Sysdigger.
Wow, I think that's one of the best employee names I've heard, Sysdigger. Sharyn, you're also known in this world as the webinar chick. That's very interesting. How did that come about?
That's a funny story. When I was looking to kind of rebrand myself when I had my own production company, one of the things I wanted to do was to bring a sense of whimsy and, I want to get to know her. So best $50 I ever spent, I created a caricature, and the caricature is me with a headset on and on air. I still use it today. And what happened is I went to a presentation conference and someone introduced me as the webinar chick, and it just stuck. So, I've really kind of run with the brand and have done a lot of speaking and writing around that. So it's been a lot of fun. And I think it goes to my personality and the way I like to approach things.
So I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience want to know, and they're burning with this question about how do they increase the number of registrations for their webinars? How do they increase conversions? But we're going to park it towards the end, and we're going to take it towards the end, if that's all right.
So I think I would say first, let's start and realize no matter what you do, you really need to create an experience that thinks about your audience. It's not just about registration and conversion. It's about creating the right experience. And if you don't do that, then folks are not going to register. They're not going to come. I also think you have to be really compelling in whatever the title or the abstract is. And I think something that just does tech speak and doesn't explain to people how they're going to benefit, what's in it for them, is really not going to be a home run for you when it comes to doing webinars. Absolutely. The other thing is, I think you need to think creatively about how to talk to people. Today's generation really relies on their phone, so you have to be mobile ready. One of the things we've done at Sysdig is add video invitations or trailers to our email invitations as well as to social media. So you're finding a way to engage and get people invested in order to register or attend. One other program we did is we brought in a white hat hacker earlier this year, where he has hacked into Apple. He's paid to do it, and he shared some of his thoughts. And then we tied it with a charity event for Black Girls Hack. And that was really a lot of fun because we had them invested as well. And so I think you have to think outside of the box. It's not just put an event up there and pray that it works. You have to figure out how many touches in different ways can you promote the event, whether it be through email, through social media, LinkedIn events, retargeting. There's a number of tools. It's not just a one and done anymore, which complicates the setup and the production process, but it's important to try and get to where people are going to look for information. And I think that's one of the keys to building registration.
Yeah. And I think it's basically meeting your audience where they are. And like you said, with this generation, they're always on their phone. So you need to be able to grab their attention rather quickly and keep it for a while. And I'm sure a lot of people want to know how to hack into Apple. So I'm sure that session must have been fantastic.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I was just saying that, a lot of people may want to know how to hack into Apple. So that must have been an interesting session.
Well, I think you have to, I often say, having kids this age, that my kids' attention is that of a gnat. And so you need to find a way to engage them. How do you do it visually? How do you do an image? What is it if they're scrolling through their email that is engaging enough? Or if they're on a LinkedIn, what imagery or words are you using to drive people? And I think even if your event may not be as sexy, you have to market it as sexy.
Yeah, I mean, that's half the battle, isn't it? So Sharyn, you also ran your own marketing and production agency for 22 years. And you must have seen a lot of change happening throughout these years in terms of technology, formats, things that work, things that don't work. I'd really love to double click on that and see, what your thoughts are about the journey that you've seen.
So I think when webinars first started, they were nothing to do with the conversation like you and I are having. It was all about training. And that's really where it started. It was in the heart of training. And people were using that as just-in-time learning. And that became really, really important in the late 90s, early 2000s. You had, before the Zooms and everything in the world, you had Placeware. And that got bought by Microsoft, and, things kind of changed and evolved, but it was not sophisticated. It literally was a screen where you could talk and maybe a slide, but you couldn't do anything like, how do you build in polls? How do you talk to people? It was very much a one-way conversation. And I think we've evolved as an industry and as technology to something that is more engaging. You don't want death by PowerPoint. You really want to have an engaging conversation, thought-provoking. Let's have a dialogue around the content. Let's not just show the slide. And I think that's been a really big change. And I think the pandemic has definitely changed where people now go to have conversations. I think Zoom is a great example. We're all using Zoom for one reason or another. And before the pandemic, we may not have done that as much. It may have been an afterthought. But as companies have become more remote with their workforce, or if they didn't have an opportunity to do an in-person meeting or an in-person event, we've definitely seen some creativity around that. We've seen the evolution of streaming. We've seen the evolution of HD cameras, things that have really tried to make it more of a realistic event, more realistic technology. And I think we're just starting. I think integration is going to be the next key. How do we integrate it so we're not in separate platforms? How do we integrate it into a platform we have or a website? How do we make it easy for people? Because some people, especially with a lot of the bad actors out there and threats, are locking down their company computers or company organizations and what they can access. How do we make it accessible for them as well? And for me personally, as you know, I'm partially deaf. So adding closed captions has been life-changing for me.
Yeah, I think the technology, as it has evolved from just being an L&D tool to be a conversational tool, it has also become a lot more inclusive in the past few years. And I think, like you rightly said, the pandemic accelerated a lot of these innovations, which would otherwise have taken 4 or 5 or 6 years to get right. But in that 2 year window, tech evolved, and adoption of tech also evolved by leaps and bounds, right? So my daughter, when she goes to school, when she didn't go to school during the pandemic, she was introduced to the webinar format of learning, right? Which was like one teacher, 40 students and stuff. But it would never have happened until she probably joined college or something else, had it not been for the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pandemic changed things. I think it also forced us to find different ways, and that's where virtual conferences and events came up, where webinars, because people couldn't travel, have really changed. I think we've seen some people with going back to in-person and maybe less in virtual events, and others that are so used to it that I think we'll see a huge spike in on-demand in the next year. I think that you want to start, you get busy, you're on other screens, you want to go back and revisit it. So I think the next wave will be, how do we integrate on demand as part of an engagement strategy going forward?
Yeah, interesting point that you made there, right, about integration. But just to double down on that, when you say make it accessible and integrated with the platforms that you guys have, how does that happen? So isn't it already integrated in many ways? Can't you just go and watch a webinar when you have the time?
Absolutely. If you've got YouTube, you've got Vimeo, you can go to a company's website and watch something on demand. Yeah. I think you have a lot of things. Zoom enables chapters, so you have the ability to look at it from a chapter standpoint. Mm-hmm. If you want to go back and relook at materials, you can download a presentation, you can download a book or a guide or research. So I think then you have the ability to share it and maybe take it to the next level. I am a certified event technologist, and I did my entire certification program online. It was a combination of a learning management system as well as tests and actual lectures. And I think that I wouldn't have been able to do it in person because I just didn't have the time. So the pandemic afforded me some time to do that. And I thought it was a great example of how you can use virtual events or webinars as a way to improve yourself both personally and professionally.
Of course. Interestingly that you mentioned event technologists there. So you had event people and you had technology people who managed events, right? So now you've got this new role called event technologist. What is this and how has it come about?
I do both. So I have a background in TV production. Okay. So I worked for ABC Sports a long time ago, and so I really understand production. What an event technologist does is understand how to take it's almost like you put a puzzle together, and we will rechange and redistribute and reuse ideas and technology in order to deliver different experiences. So, to include, a better camera setup, or setting up a studio where you've got the Logitech Brio mouse and I've got, an Audio Technica mic and an ATEM mini mixer. So I've got all the back end. So it's really about how to utilize the technology to deliver a better experience, both for the presenters as well as for the attendees.
Right. And interestingly, that role has converged into one person like yourself, right? A few years ago, event folks just had to worry about the content and making sure everything was in place. And they had a team that did it. But now, event folks are expected to know about the technology that runs that event, right?
Right.
And that has not been, and it's not been an overnight thing. Sure, the pandemic probably accelerated it, but it's been some time coming, right? So, do you think a lot has changed from what an event marketer or a field marketer's role used to be to what it is now?
Oh, absolutely. And it goes back to what we talked about, going to where the people are and where they want to learn information. That could be in person. It could be virtual. And then you have to understand, how do you create a better experience that gives them the right call to action, that they're going to leave your event and go do something. So it could be, taking a test if you're trying to test people and give them an idea of what their credibility or their certification should be. It could be really great information about a research that you've done or research that's out there. It's an industry discussion to try and make sure that you are known as a thought leader. You want to present thought-provoking conversations. You want to start that conversation both online as well as post-event.
Okay. So for folks getting into this space, who are just starting off as event planners or event marketers or field marketers, how do they go about learning about technology? Because there's just a lot of technology out there as far as events go, and it can't be easy. So where does one start?
That's a good question. I belong to an event technologist kind of community, and, we laugh about it. At one point during the pandemic, there were over 200 platforms, and everybody had a different platform. And so it became, how can you be the king of many instead of the king of one? And so you've got to look at it. I think you have to take, especially if you're in meetings and planning, you take what you've learned there, and that works really well and translates to both webinars and virtual events. I think you have a lot of opportunities for learning. Invest in yourself. I've been through, the masterclass with Zoom. I've been through On24's masterclass. As much for my own education, because I feel it's important that I know how to fix things, because things break. So I always have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. And there's a plan E somewhere as well. So you have to know how to handle it. And it could be a technology problem, but it could also be a person problem. One of the stories I love telling is when we did this Charlie Miller webinar in February, I got a call at 4 a.m. that one of our Sysdig speakers was sick and couldn't attend. And so we had to scramble in a couple hours and figure out how to fix him, from eliminating him on the platform, finding a new speaker, adding it. So you've got to have kind of a backup plan for the different things that you do.
Yeah. Event marketers, live with that thrill. I mean, what's life without that kind of action, right? And plan A, plan B, plan C is, I think, event marketing 101.
Yeah. The Event Leadership Institute, which is also PCMA, is a really great place to go if you're trying to figure out what your event skills should be. There's a good community of us, so we all kind of gravitate towards solving problems. This morning, I'm part of the On24 webinar community, and they once a month have a coffee roundtable with webinars where you can ask questions, bring in problems, how to solve things. And I think finding a way to also walk a day in somebody else's shoes and learn what they've done is another way to build your education. It's not like you can go to event technology college and come back with a degree. A lot of it is by understanding what your audience strategy is and the experience you want to create, and then making sure that the event platform that you choose matches the need for that experience.
Yeah. So, that reminds me, one of our guests early on in Event Heroes, a gentleman called Rich from ETP, they're a production agency. So he was telling me that when he started off in events, the guy, he was supposed to just learn how to coil wires for 1 month straight. He didn't do anything. He didn't lift any other thing. It was just roping in and roping out day in and day out. And it's like by the end of those 30 days, I felt like a cowboy, and it was my rite of passage. And that is what it was true for everybody who joined at, a similar role. And, from there to this, we've come such a long way.
So my first show or program project with ABC was the Lake Placid Olympics. And I pulled a lot of wire and I was freezing for days. So I totally get it. You've got to pay your dues. You have to understand. And you also have to learn from failure, because failure is an option and failing is okay if you learn from it.
Yeah. No, I completely get that. So coming back to your role at Sysdig and how you think about building your webinars and your event programs, how do you start? So you've got 12 months, you've got 18 months of planning to do. Where do you start?
Not that often. We try and do 6 to 8 weeks, but I would say that the world has changed. Registrations, looking at the benchmarks from like 124 and Bright Talk and some of the others from ELI, you're finding that most people are registering. It's really just-in-time registration. They're registering that 5 to 10 days before you actually attend a webinar. Yeah. So I think I'm planning now for the rest of the year, but that may change based on, a new business need that'll come up. I like a minimum of 8 to 10 weeks because I have my own process. I use a webinar worksheet that is mine that kind of puts in, here's the title, the abstract, here's all the information. Here's our internal logistics, whether it be the Google Drive where I've housed the material or, Marketo and Salesforce links, pictures, and then I create custom folders in Google Drive for each event, and I do it by date. So, I have a process that for me to set up, making sure we get on their calendars, making sure I've ordered enough time for banners for the website, or on 24, which is what we use, has banners for their reg and on-demand and lobby page. So you have to create those imagery as well. And then working with the speakers, making sure that it's not 2-point type, that it's got an image and that they've got a script to run with it. I bring in an old broadcast tool, which is a run of show. I use a run of show where I put in the slide and add the notes. And if there's an action like launching a poll, I will include that in the run of show so the speakers know exactly how that is going to be used.
All right. So not leaving anything to memory, checklisting everything, making sure that every box is ticked right there up to day 0. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say we have different types of webinars. We do a lot with third party. Mm-hmm. So, I've also created templates for each of their worksheets that they need and their forms that they need. Okay. So I just know what I have to deliver, and it makes it a lot easier to do. Back to your question.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So, these we'll come back to these worksheets and checklists in a bit. You mentioned earlier on that you have some cheat sheets also that you're open to sharing, right? That it will be amazing if our audience can get hands on it. It's going to make their lives a lot better. Mine for sure.
Yeah, I have a couple of sheets happy to do. I'll put my, we can share my email where I have, oh no, I'm a Zoom presenter. What do I do? And it even tells you, how to do the Zoom facelift, which is just playing with some of the video settings, which makes you look 10 years younger, or how and what not to wear. Don't wear any jangly jewelry and hear banging against the mic and things. Happy to do that. If we can put my email in the chat, happy to share that with people as well.
Happy to. Yeah, we'll take care of that. And I'm sure it's actually the little details that make a big difference. And it's all these small things that actually elevate the experience in my, is what I've seen. So my question was that, you've got a checklist right up to day 0. What do you do with the content that you generate after that? How is that used?
That's a great question. I think you can reuse the content if you want to replay it. I think it's a good example for people to understand why you're asking for the information you're asking for. Yeah. I use it a lot, whatever the abstract is, to go back and use it for the post event communication, the email follow-up with the link to the recording, or, it's an idea. I use them for ideas. So there's a lot of ways you can use the content. I think it's also good to go back and look at why was this webinar or event successful? Was it the description? Let's reuse it. Let's update it for this year. So I think there's always good in learning from what you've done in the past and what's worked and what hasn't.
That's some great tips. So I'm just going to go back to something we were talking about, right? In terms of the planning cycles, right? So you said that you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks of you have visibility for that, but then you prefer for every webinar, right? So do you plan on a quarterly basis, or do you look at 2 quarters together?
I think of both. I think there are some things, because we do a lot of virtual conferences, that I know coming up in October is a virtual conference, and I've known that for a year. So there are some things that we plan. If you have a launch around that, you may adjust other things around it. If you have an event come up, for example, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. What can we do to incorporate that in what we're doing? So I think there's different things that you're going to play. I try and get as far out as we possibly can. Sometimes I don't get that information from a third party, and you have to kind of really push for it because they're not going to work that far out. But we try as much as possible to put up our events. And we've also created on our website where you do open landing page. You can choose multiple events. And I think that also goes to growing your registration as well.
Fantastic. One thing that I wanted you to weigh in on was this debate about live events like these and on demand. And we touched upon this a little bit earlier in our conversation. But in your opinion, have you seen on demand outweigh live? Has live lost its sheen? What has been your experience?
I have not seen on demand outweigh live. What I've seen is an increase in on demand, and even with content that's a couple of years old, because the content may still be relative based on whatever their experience is or information they're trying to get. I've seen an increase in people definitely look at it on demand because they need the time. I mean, I've gone and looked at, Adobe Illustrator because I want to be better at Illustrator. So I'll go watch it on demand. So I've definitely not seen a shift, but I've seen a growth in on demand.
Okay. And that's a steady growth, given that we've got so much to do and not enough time at any given point of time. People want to consume content at their pace, right? Some folks I know listen to content at 4x. I can barely get past 1.5x to maintain some sort of comprehension. But yeah, these are the changes in consumption pattern that we're also seeing. Have you seen anything similar?
Yes and no. I mean, I've definitely seen where people are hesitant because they don't have enough time. And I think that people are very particular now about what they sign up for because I think there's not enough hours. We're all trying to do more with less. So I definitely think that's been a trend. But I think if people need that information to be successful with a project or personally or professionally, they're going to make the time to do it.
That's true. I think it's just a question of priorities and about getting to them. But yeah, this has been fantastic. I have some questions that we can go into now. So I'm just going to take them in the order that they came. The first question that I see is, okay, this is interesting, and I think you answered this, but what factors should event marketers consider when deciding which format best suits their goals and audience?
That's a great question, actually. I would say I would look at the personas you're trying to attract. And so a persona could be something like a marketing executive, or for us, it's a CISO, a chief information security officer, and understanding where they go to for information and what kind of information you want to get out. I think doing something, because we're all about the top of the funnel and building awareness, is finding that thought leadership that's going to help them in their job and making that decision. If we know that they're looking for specific information on X, Y, and Z product, you want to make sure that for that audience, you deliver that content. Another thing that comes up a lot when we're looking at third parties is that they may have a specific topic or theme. I'm doing one tomorrow that is threat hunting in the cloud. It's a solution forum, and we just released a threat report. So it's a perfect marriage. Yeah. The content's there, the audience is there. That's a good fit. And I think the other thing we do a lot of is look at guaranteed leads, which are really important because we're interested in reaching new people and making sure we get to the right audience. So understanding the persona, making sure your content is important to that persona, and making sure that their audience is a good fit.
All right, just a sidebar on that. So when you're saying, these are things that you need to keep in mind, your persona, what's important to them. What is the kind of, so basically what I'm trying to ask is, how much effort do you need to put in before you start seeing results, right? So if you're doing this on your own, if you're doing your own organic webinar program, do you go at it for 3 months, 6 months? And when do you know that, now it's working, or maybe this is not working and I need to stop?
I think that's a good question. I think, once it comes in and you look at how sales is looking at the leads, what they do with it, and how they play to those leads is important. And I think making sure that we're delivering what they need so they can take it through the sales funnel. We have a very long sales process, so we may not see the results instantly.
Right.
So we look at a variety of names and understanding who's good and who's not. But at the same time, you also need to look at what they're not providing. I did an event in July where they got attacked by a bot and gave me 1,440 junk leads that were just totally unacceptable, with titles like shop girl and copy and paster. And so you have to push back and make sure you really look at it and then measure it against the success of an event. They're making up for it, but I was really looking towards those leads and how important they were. So you really have to look at it from all sides, not just don't upload it and say, okay, you're good to go, without understanding the value and the quality of the leads that you're bringing in.
Right. And how much time do you need to give a webinar program, right? So I guess I'm going back to my first question. How much time do you give your program to kind of find its feet?
It depends on whether or not it's a new program or an old program. When many years ago, Interwise, which was bought by AT&T, had a webinar platform and a conferencing platform, but they had no database for lead gen. And so I created a magazine partnership with Chief Learning Officer, and we built, in less than 7 months, we had 115,000 people in the database by using their content as an example to drive everything. And then we went from there to kind of then having an audience we could then talk to.
Okay. All right. The next question is from Bowie. How do you measure the success of your events and webinars? And I think you've kind of answered that in part, but it would be a good opportunity to paraphrase it.
I think everyone measures it differently. I look at net new leads, net new names I'm bringing in to learn more about our company, and that's really important. And then making sure they're qualified. They're not just the wrong leads. So making sure they are who we want in our sweet spot as far as our personas and the people we're talking to, and making sure that we deliver the right names and the right numbers to our sales team so they can take them through the process.
Fair enough. One last question we can take is from Zaria. Could you share some strategies or resources that event marketers can use to keep themselves updated? So I'm guessing in addition to the PCMAs and ELIs of the world, if there are any newsletters, any courses, any influencers on LinkedIn to follow?
We're in some ways a very incestuous community. We all know each other. So I would say there's a lot of community opportunities with event tech and with event leadership, with some of the groups on LinkedIn. We all know each other. I mean, we've all known each other for a long time. I try and network as much as possible. This morning when I did the On24 coffee chat, I met 3 new people who had just done something really cool with On24 that I didn't know about. So I think it's really investing in yourself to make sure that you've got those connections and they help fuel your ideas. I'm very lucky in that Sysdig has never totally said my off-the-wall ideas are not doable or we shouldn't do them. And so they've been really great about allowing me to try things, and if it works, it's great. So we've added gamification, for example, to some of the webinars and the virtual events this year. And, you know, I think there's where integrations are going to become an important part of the next couple of years.
Right, absolutely. Gamification, and how has that worked out? Are you seeing some encouraging results from that?
Not on the webinar side, but definitely on the virtual event platform size. And I think we did a couple of things. There's a great resource called Engamio, Engamio. It's incredibly reasonable. I think it was $500 for 10,000 logins. You can create a custom crossword puzzle, which I did, and then they had to crack the code. And if they did that, they could win, you know, they could get entered into a drawing. A lot of people who may not know us figured out, oh yeah, I want to win something, because we have a lot of people that are swag hunters. But what was really nice is they needed to read our virtual booth in order to get the answers to the crossword. So there was a method to the madness. Another thing we did was a virtual postcard. Send us a virtual postcard and you'll get a t-shirt. So, I mean, there's some, I think, different ways to stand out. And gamification, I think, is not something that a webinar platform does very well right now. I had this conversation this morning with On24. We talked about that, but I think it's what has to happen. You need to be able to use an API or an embed code and add that as a pod or a piece of the technology so that you can do that. You can do that on some of the platforms like Swoogo and Swapcard and some of the others that have been more open source, open API, not a closed API, will allow you to create a better experience for your attendee.
Fantastic.
That's a whole other conversation platform.
We should get you back on the show just for that. One last question. I know we're on top of the time. Top 3 things to keep in mind when building an events program.
Ooh.
Top 3 is going to be difficult. Top 10 would have been easier, but top 3 is going to be tough.
I'm not sure I can limit to 3, so I'll just let it all hang out. I would say number 1 is make sure you know who you're doing the events program for, who the target audience is, and what experience you want to create. I think that's number 1. Number 2 is make sure you think of this as a production and you make your speakers feel comfortable. Since I added a run of show, our speakers feel so much more prepared, so much more comfortable that we're there to help them be successful. And I think do not do death by PowerPoint. I love PowerPoint. It's my favorite tool, but I don't want to see tiny type 1 slides. I want to see slides used as a fodder for communication and interactive discussions. And I think consistency, making sure that you've got the right processes in place. It's a process to do an events program. Make sure you understand it. Make sure that the people that you bring in to help you from the speaker perspective or are willing to understand, here's the way it lays out. But also, my biggest thing is, I believe creativity is the soul of having a good events program. And I'm not known for thinking inside the box as much as thinking outside the box. Finding creative ways to either deliver the right webinar experience, find a way to market to a different audience, understanding how to work with speakers because you get to know who they are and what they do well with, and being able to adjust your production schedule and your production process to accommodate their quirks. which, is really important as well. I could go on, but that's just a quick overview of what I would suggest.
Well, those are fantastic points. I think you've covered the crux of the matter, and it's been so good to have this conversation with you. But before I let you go, I have what I like to call the rapid fire round, and you don't have to think about it, but just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. All right, ready?
Yep.
What's your favorite fruit?
Strawberry.
Favorite podcast?
Ooh, I would say Brent Kruger and Will Curran's event podcast.
Okay, fantastic. I haven't heard of that, but I'm going to now. And do you have a guest you can recommend for Event Heroes? Somebody you'd like to hear from?
Yeah, Brent Kruger's fabulous. Brent Kruger or Will Curran are both fabulous. Brent is kind of the father of event technologists, and he knows his stuff. So, he is a lot of fun. He's engaging, and he's always bringing up new tools to kind of do that. The other person would be John Chen, who is a virtual spokesperson, hysterically funny, very outgoing, very good at bringing your audience in. He knows both the technology and he's a comedian by trade. So he does really, really well. And another one would be Song Division. Song Division has done during the pandemic a really cool way to engage people where they will bring everybody into a meeting. It's great for events. And as they go through, they will create a song from the content that they get from everybody in the meeting. And it's a great way to end the meeting. It's a lot of fun, engaging, and you don't even realize an hour goes by.
Fantastic. Those are some great recommendations. Thank you once again, Sharyn, for joining us. It's been an insightful conversation. We're going to get you back to talk about just gamification. But this has been a blast.
Oh, it's been a blast for me too. Thanks so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, folks, for joining in, and we'll see you soon at the next episode.
You got it. Bye-bye.